within your provisions that are in conflict with Kansas law, that memo that you sent out. So obviously McPherson has taken that tack. So
I do want to try and stick on use of utility revenues, but I would say, since that's something that we can already do,
transfer from fund to fund.
Transfer from fund to fund. That while this is something that, unless there is a feeling or a majority of council members that would like to be able to expend money for promoting economic development, that maybe having a use of utility revenues as dictated in their charter ordinance number 1 is unnecessary.
I guess the question I have is governing transfers of funds from the electric utility to the city. I think that within the current statute, which obviously we take as void, I understand that, there's a under use of utility funds for that, it talks specifically about the pilot, which is payment in lieu of taxes or a franchise fee. If we were to establish a pilot for our water, wastewater, electric, as the transfer mechanism, we would have to do that under a charter ordinance, because I don't believe that there's any standing for a pilot. If I'm not mistaken, maybe Mr. Dane can clarify, but a pilot, from the standpoint of a city-owned utility, is not really provided for in state statute, correct?
Typically, I suppose I'd have to add more definition on what a pilot is. A pilot typically is referred to as a payment in lieu of taxes.
Correct. Franchise fee.
Right, and so those are two different things.
Okay.
Yeah. A franchise fee, in essence, typically is assessed to enable a utility company
Correct.
to use your right-of-ways and things like that nature. Payment in lieu of taxes, on the other hand, takes a tax-exempt entity and has them pay or make payments that they would otherwise have to make. It is typically the framework that I hear that in. I am aware of payment in lieu of taxes associated with utilities and situations where that's happened.
Does it make sense under a city-owned utility to have a pilot mechanism or some sort of formal transfer?
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
Well, the entity that I'm aware of that occurs is with the Board of Public Utilities over in Kansas City, Kansas. They do have a pilot payment to the unified government.
Okay.
I guess, as we're talking about these payments and franchise fees, and I think our existing franchise fee, and Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of a set amount. It's not, we've all talked about it like it's a percentage, but it really isn't. It's just a plugged-in number, and it varies based on, the amount doesn't vary, but as far as the percentage does vary based on whatever the revenues are, correct?
I've stated previously, I am unable to locate any form of any history that tells me how that was calculated. So it's a plugged-in number that's living in the budget, and it balances the general fund. So if you change it, then we'll have to rebalance general fund, which is fine, but I also want to, it's probably a good time to mention that we are moving forward. As of Friday, finance staff finished getting quotes from, we sent a request for quote, because it's not necessary for an RFP if you expect it to be less than $15,000. Do a study to 8 different entities. 5 of them we got from KMU, and we only got 1 response after 2 rounds of trying. So we've got several no thank yous, several we're too busy, several inquiries, 1 response. But I called him today and left a message saying we're ready to move forward. So we will have something done by an outside party to something that I can say this is how it was done, and we'll all be going through it and getting an agreement. So that problem will be taken care of in the future.
So I think philosophically, we need to have a discussion as to, because in my mind, if that's the case, if we're going to continue to put money through some mechanism, franchise fee, into the general fund, that means we're assuming that revenues being generated by our utilities to move money into that fund. So if, to me, the discussion is, do we continue that philosophy? So do we really believe that this utility should be in essence, revenue generator, or do we believe that we should establish a reserve policy, and then once those reserves are met, any money above that either gets reduced through rates or, something else within the utilities toward capital? Because as we further separate this, if this is the direction we go, then I think that becomes more of a question.
Well, so you're saying, do we want to only take from a blended Board of Public Utility the actual costs associated with
The overhead.
their overhead with the city?
Right. Basically,
Okay.
that's what
As
I'm
opposed to a pilot. And how do other council members feel about that? And honestly, that's, and when we talk, and I do want to get around to disbursement of revenue, because I do want to give the electric utility board members an opportunity to weigh in on that. But back to Christie's point.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I think that, to a great extent, Christie, I think you're correct. I think that if we have a situation where we have gross revenue, revenues that are way above projections, but the funny thing is, there's projections are themselves a funny thing. 2 years ago, we had projected revenues way over, or revenues way over our projections, because of the fact we had a very long hot summer. A lot of electricity had to be generated, had to be purchased. This past summer was a lot less hot than we had expected it would be, and there was a lot less utility usage, a lot less electric usage, and so the revenue came in under projections by about $1 million, if I'm not mistaken. And so, tying next year's rates or next year's reserve projections to last year's usage may not necessarily be the right thing to do. We could take a rolling 3-year average or something like that to maybe try to make that a little bit more flat and utilize something like that. But taking it based on last year's revenues, you open yourself up potentially to having an unhealthy reserve balance at the end of the term.
Well, and I'm not suggesting, I guess from my perspective, what I'm suggesting, and I'm just saying for conversation, if we decide that we eliminate any opportunity for a franchise fee, pilot, whatever you want to call it, type environment, then Steve, what you're saying is then the utility basically supports itself. So that's just less money that they have to worry about from an expense perspective to turn over to the city. So it doesn't, that to me isn't going to, if anything, that's going to help them.
Well,
because they don't have to worry about giving a % of their revenue to the city.
No, they only have to worry about
They just worry
paying
about
for
internal.
the internal services that they're receiving. And I don't know that we know for sure whether or not the 5% covers that, or if that exceeds that.
well, there hasn't been a study done. That was arbitrary.
Right.
Mark, you have a question?
Yes, please.
The franchise fee is in addition to those overages. The cost for the overhead of the electric is paid for through transfers. The franchise fee is a flat extra 5%, and the reason for that is if there had been a third party that came in here, if we had sold, KCPL would have charged you a 5%, or the city council would have charged KCPL 5% to be here. It was a standard number, and you have to actually go to KCC to go above 5%. And so we said, let's make it the highest it could be, so the city gets the best benefit from it.
That's kind of so if we sold the utility, one of the benefits for owning our own utility is being able to control that. And the big benefit to owning your own utility is controlling rates and service. And so that doesn't necessarily mean